Awesome. Well, thank you so much for spending some time with us today around the campfire, Matt. I don't know anyone else in the world that knows more about Blair Witch Project than you. Perhaps maybe our other special guest, Mr. Michael, who's also just joined us. And I will let everybody speak in just a second, but let me go ahead and set the room and explain what we're doing here today. So this is the Digital Campfire. My name is Blair Bathory. I am your host for hopefully, again, weekly sessions at the fire. And we talk about everything spooky, scary, and creepy, horror movies, anything that kind of tickles that, you know, spooky bones that we all have in our bodies. So this week, we are discussing the infamous Blair Witch Project, which is, I think, everybody's favorite found footage movie. It certainly is mine, and of course, I have been called Blair Witch my entire life, so it's been a present entity throughout my entire 32 years. But back in March, Mr. Jed Shepherd and I visited Burkittsville, Maryland, which is the original filming location of the majority of the Blair Witch Project. And today we have a couple of special guests. So if we could just go in line and introduce yourselves and what you do or who you are, however you want to do it. So start with you, Andrew.
Yeah, my name is Andrew Hawkins. I'm a filmmaker. I have some releases that are out that everyone can see if they look for them. Jan Svankmeyer's Insect, I executive produced. The director of Begotten and Shadow of the Vampire, Elias Marriage, has a new film coming, Polyemblastema, which will be debuting soon. And also, I have a film in production, Mental Health and Horror, with my partner, Jonathan Barkan, documentary where we discuss a lot of how horror movies can help people and our reflections on that subject. So that's me, and I'm excited for today.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Matt, go ahead.
Hey everyone, my name is Matt Blazi. I'm the author of 8 Days in the Woods, the making of the Blair Witch Project. Needed to tell the story of the Blair Witch Project, and I am not a filmmaker, so I said, well, I can put pen to paper, and I went ahead and decided to share the entire experience of how they brought that film to life through books, and I'm really proud of that, and hopefully I would love it to see more films like the Blair Witch come out there and really take us by storm, and we have more to talk about in that vein. And I'm also the host of the Blair Witch Experience, an annual location tour of all the filming locations of the Blair Witch Project, including in the woods and camping and special surprises and all that stuff. So we're doing that every year, and we'll be doing that again this August.
Amazing. And I actually am holding the book in my hand right here because I have a ton of questions. So Matt gave me the 8 Days in the Woods book when I was with him in March, and I've read it front to back probably 10 times now, and it is one of my favorite books, and as a filmmaker, an indie filmmaker, and a lover of horror, it's a must. So before we end the campfire today, I will link either your website or wherever you want to send people to buy or purchase the book, Matt.
Awesome.
And last but not least, Mr. Michael.
I'm really, can y'all hear me?
Yes, sir, we can hear you.
Okay, all right. Well, my name is Michael Robinson, and I'm currently the mayor of Burkittsville, Maryland. And I'm currently in Burkittsville, Maryland. Leave it at that for now.
So his...
Keeping the beaches open. Doing that from that.
Amazing. So in case y'all didn't hear that Mr. Michael Robinson is currently the mayor of Burkittsville, Maryland, which is so cool. Congratulations again. This just happened. So I'm stoked that you're here as the mayor. But we also got to meet you back in March and experience some of the Blair Witch Project memorabilia that very few people have held with their hands. So it was a very special experience. And also you gave me one of the Blair Witch wooden, Matt, what is that officially called? The symbols?
The Stickman?
Yeah, the Stickman. I got one of those, and then I ended up leaving it in the damn woods. So there is a stick man back in the woods where they filmed Blair Witch Project. So
we can make more. There's lots of yard waste.
Yeah, so I definitely need to make some more. I want for Halloween to like hang some up around my apartment complex in Atlanta and just scare the shit out of people.
Oh, that'd be so great.
Yeah. So Blair will actually put up some Blair Witch stickman for Halloween. So anyway, just one more time, this is the Digital Campfire, and if anybody wants to come up and ask questions towards the end of the fire, please just raise your hand. You're welcome to come up. Just know that this is being recorded and I will be repurposing it as a podcast essentially on my YouTube. But anybody's welcome to ask questions. And seriously, if you're a Blair Witch Project fan, Matt and Michael are two of the best people you could possibly ask questions about this specific film. So I'm really honored that they could come today. So Blair Witch Project. Let's start from the beginning. Matt, how did this movie come to fruition in the early stages?
Well, Ed and Dan and all the guys that would end up forming Hacks had met at UCF, University of Central Florida, and they were first and second year film students, and they were doing their student films, and they got out of school and they're like, let's make a movie. This is what we do. But they couldn't figure out what to do. Scream had just come out, so that was making waves, and they were really trying to figure out what would scare us. And they've famously said many times, In Search Of was a big influence on the Blair Witch, along with Legend of Boggy Creek, and they just started world building. What if we did this? And trying to spitball and saying, we're not Hollywood guys. We don't have a lot of money. We don't have access to, tons of equipment, high paid actors. This isn't going to happen. So what can we do? So they started figuring out, how can we make a movie within our means and utilize what we have around us? Ed was from Central Maryland. We can film in the woods there. So they started building this whole world around, well, what if there was a local legend? And they came up with the town of Blair, and there's a supposed witch, and they witch hunted her and tied her to the tree, and they started building on that, and that was just kind of how it started. It was, how can we make a story with what we have and where we're at, and literally went from there.
Amazing. So can you name drop who the original filmmakers were? Because a lot of people don't know it was two directors, correct?
Correct. The co-directors were Ed Sanchez and Dan Myrick. They were also the co-writers and co-editors of the film. Greg Hale was the executive producer who was there during filming, who was basically in charge of a lot of the logistics, getting them in and around the woods, because he had Special Forces Army training. So he knew how to survive in the wilderness, and he applied that to the style of filmmaking that they were going to go out and ultimately Heather, Mike, and Josh were going to do. Ben Rock was the art department. He came up with the stick, the final stickman design, and did a lot of production designer. Came up with a lot of the aesthetics that we saw in the film.
So cool. So how did you first get involved in just digging deep into the making of this movie that you had nothing to do with at the beginning, and now you're kind of synonymous with, like, you're the behind the scenes guy of this movie? How did that all come to pass?
I mean, I was 18 when the film came out, and it just kind of, the first time I saw the trailer, it dug its hooks into me, and I was done. I was completely obsessed with it that summer. Saw it a bunch of times, read everything I could, and in the spring of 2000, I went down to where the house was. Somebody gave me directions offline, and I went down while the house was still standing. I was like, oh, this is great. You have to fast forward 12 years till I actually went to Burkittsville for the very first time. I started getting into movie location visits and located in South Central PA. I'm pretty close to a lot of stuff, and it was, more and more people at that time were getting on Facebook. So I got hooked up with Ed Sanchez, who went to high school with a friend of mine, and I started like, let's go out in the woods, let's go to all these locations and let's camp. And that kind of kicked open the door for the first Blair Witch experience. And that was, Ed came out and finally took me to where they hung the stick men and where the rock piles were. And that just kind of started snowballing. Every day more and more I was digging up stuff about the Blair Witch, because it was one of those films that for a long time people were fans of, but nobody was talking about. And the first time I went to Burkittsville and did almost all the locations, like, God, I love living in this world. Why aren't more people talking about it? So I got online. I was like, there's no Blair Witch presence. There was a Hacks and Films group, but it wasn't really active. So I made a Blair Witch group on Facebook, and I said, we need to have this. This is our corner of Facebook to talk about the Blair Witch. And I wanted to see if there were any more like-minded people. And slowly but surely, more of the cast and crew were getting wind of it. Ed was inviting them, and then they were inviting other people, and then they would start sharing information. And I was like, man, there is a lot more to this film than even I thought, because I'm not a filmmaker. I don't know what goes into certain films. I always thought it was like this little micro budget film that they just happened to they got lucky on. And the more I would ask questions or I'd get introduced to people, the story just kept unrolling and unraveling. And I was like, my God, there's a lot here. So I wanted to start digging more into that, because it is one of my favorite films. And I felt that more people need to know how that movie was made.
Amazing. And let's kind of like go back in time, because I was, I think, 7 or 8 when it came out. I was a little girl. I was in elementary school, and my mother definitely would not allow me on the internet or to see this film in theaters. And I ended up seeing it on a VHS tape at a friend's house in secret. And what was like the buzz that was happening in the 90s when this film came out, and like how they utilized an online marketing campaign, and were they the first to do that? Kind of talk about, just going back to 1997 and what was happening.
Well, in 97, they had filmed what's called a proof of concept. They wanted to attract investors, so they made this little 8-minute investor reel, and were sharing it around to people. And they got in front of John Pearson from Split Screen, who famously aired it in August of 1997. And immediately people flocked to John Pearson's message boards. For those of us who are old enough to remember the wild, wild west of the internet days, message boards was where you hung out. And after a couple of days, the traffic to John's website kept crashing his website. So he basically got on the phone with these guys like, look, you guys need to get you need to get off my website. You need to get your own. You're killing me here. So they moved all the folks over to their hacks and boards, and they were like, this is interesting. People think this is real. Let's just run with it. There wasn't a lot of discussion as to whether or not we need to let them know this is fake or keep letting them know it's real. Let's just put it out there and see what people make of it. And that proof of concept trailer was filmed before they even set foot in the woods with Heather, Mike, and Josh. If you watch that investor reel, I think it's Billy, Jane, and John were the characters' names, and they just use pictures of friends to tell the story. And after they went out and shot the film, they just kept adding stuff to their message boards, like, oh, here's a photo of their car. Here's a picture. Here's the last photo that they took before they went into the woods, because they had Heather, Mike, and Josh go. I can't even think of the campus name right now. They took them around the campus and took photos as if they were lifelong, or college friends. So they were just laying this quote unquote evidence out there for people to see, and it kept snowballing. And the early days of the internet, no one had seen any of that stuff. They were saying, yep, we got this footage. We'll let you guys know when we know more, and this and that. And people just started flocking to it because, any movie that's made in Hollywood, who the cast is, they're talking about it, there's behind the scenes pictures. But the early days of the internet, we hadn't seen any of this stuff. And it was just, people just couldn't believe that there was this film out there about these missing kids, and we were going to hopefully see it, or, what's going on. So it was a very, very fun time in 1998, 1999, because you couldn't dig deeper and find anything because it wasn't there. We hadn't built up the history of the internet that we have now, where you can look back and see, oh, well, this article was written about this 10 years ago, so this can't be real. So it was a fun time. There wasn't cast interviews. The filmmakers weren't talking, especially before the film came out. There wasn't the press kits that were going around. They weren't being interviewed. The trailer's dropping. No one's, they're not interviewing anybody. The cast has disappeared, quote unquote. So it was such an interesting time that no one had seen before, and honestly, it'll never be replicated again.
Until I do it. No, I'm kidding. I am working on trying to figure out how to do it in modern age, but we'll see. Anyway, well, we'll pause right there because I want to dig deeper into the making of and, get into the nitty gritty of that. And I'm really interested to hear your take on the casting process because I found that really interesting and unique. But Andrew and Michael, what did you guys think about the Blair Witch Project when you first saw it, whether it was the website or the film in the 90s?
Oh, Michael, please go ahead. I've got some memories of all of the marketing and the phenomena that happened, but I'd love to hear from the mayor of Burkittsville first.
Well, I wasn't mayor of Burkittsville then, and I didn't even know that Burkittsville existed until the ads started coming out. But I was working at a movie theater, so it kind of came out. It got a limited release first, so there was some buzz building in July of '99. So my wife and we built a little stick man and hung it in the trees outside the theater. And I have an angry letter from a parent from one of those that I had tucked inside my Blair Witch Project DVD. But there was this build that we were feeling around the theater, like, oh, this thing, are you getting this movie? Is it coming? The Haunting just came out. Is it going to be like that? And they're like, no, it's not going to be different. And so it was July '99 was an odd month for movies. Like the same week that Blair Witch went out, in the limited release, we got Lake Placid, Muppets from Space, and Eyes Wide Shut, which I watched back to back in one day. And I'm never replicated that triple feature since, but it was cool seeing it because I got to see it with the employee screening to make sure we didn't put any reels on backwards. So there were about 5 of us in the theater, just watching it for the first time without really an audience. And then it was over, and like a storm was coming in as we walked out of the theater. It was like dark and rainy. And like, okay, this is the right atmosphere to walk out from this film in. And not even thinking that 20 plus years later I would be living in the town that it made famous, much less being the head cryptid here. But I still have an original poster. I think it's the only thing I really have left. I've got the teaser poster up in my house, and but then like people also don't remember that like the week after Blair Witch went wide, The Sixth Sense came out. So it was a good year for big horror releases in that summer, and a lot of people did like it, but we had a lot of people coming out of the theater wanting their money back. It's like, this just looks like a cheap student film, and I don't think we had anybody throw up, which I know that there's some apocryphal stories about it, the shaky cam making people sick. But I'll hand that over to you, Andrew.
Yeah, I had a kind of experience that sort of followed what you had, Michael, because I was a video store guy. I worked in a Hollywood video for years, and when Blair Witch hit, it was just so many tapes on the shelf that we were fronting and facing all the time in their plastic squeeze cases, and always going out the door and people just cycling to get it. because I really feel like that marketing and that phenomena, the people who missed it in the theater and didn't get that big screen experience, were so intrigued by what they were hearing about with the internet, just like you were talking about, Matt, being fresh and everyone discussing it on boards, and the original website being almost this intriguing kind of I'd call it like an original, the first big hit alternate reality game, or alternate reality marketing is what it seemed like in retrospect. But at the time, we didn't know what it was, and there were ads and shorts coming out on Sci-Fi Channel, I remember, and so many people were just passing it around word of mouth that you had to see it, and you had to watch it in the dark, and it was taboo, and you don't know if it was real until you finally sat down with it. But so many people knew that it was a film. At the same time, it was that found footage phenomena that everyone always kind of really attributes it as. And that's the biggest thing that I felt changed the game at the end of the 90s and the beginning of the 2000s. And we had the William Castle remakes, and we had, of course, like you mentioned, Sixth Sense being just a huge mega blockbuster twist horror thriller that we all went and saw in one way or another. But that was the thing that I take away from the most, was that it really was a game changer, and everyone who was around at that time was aware of it, and it stuck with them.
Yeah, and for me, I was henceforth Blair Witch throughout elementary school, middle school, and high school. So, and my mother hated it, and I remember her distinctly saying, "I named you Blair because it couldn't have a nickname, and here you are, Blair Witch." So she hates the film because of that. But of course, I love it.
See, I got lucky. My middle name is Blair, and when everyone asks me what it's from, I always say, "Oh, The Thing." Just, yeah.
I mean, Blair
from The Thing.
Yeah, Blair.
John Carpenter. That's my guess.
In general, is synonymous with horror in so many
ways.
And yeah, I feel honored that I get to carry that name with me in the career that I've chosen.
Blair Witch for life. They're great.
You got it. So I want to get into like the nitty gritty of like some stuff some people probably don't know about the making of Blair Witch, and then Michael, I want to talk about Burkittsville itself, and just the town and kind of the history of this town. So Matt, I want to talk about the casting process, because I had never really seen anything like that. Me coming as a filmmaker, I was really curious about how they had all these people improv with each other to find the right mix of people. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, they put an ad in Backstage Magazine in New York. They also auditioned in Orlando, where they were basically based out of. They stayed in the area after school, and they decided to try LA, but New York ended up being where they ended up finding Heather, Mike, and Josh. And the ad was a completely improvised feature to be in the woods and show up for the audition. The audition itself was also completely improvised. They came in, they sat down, and they just jumped into scenario, whatever that scenario was. And they found the people they liked, and then they started mixing them together. So you would have Josh and some guy, Joe Smith, whatever. And they would see how they interacted off each other. They would put them in a woods-like scenario. Say, okay, this is happening and this and that, and go. And they tried different combinations of people. So obviously they ended up with Heather, Mike, and Josh, because they found that those three just had the best chemistry of the hundreds of people that they ended up interviewing. And again, there was no formal script. There was a story. There was a world that they created, but there wasn't anything to really go by. They just said, okay, you're in the woods, you hear something, you want to leave, you want to stay, and you don't know what to do, and go for it. And every single word of dialogue in the film, just like in the audition, was completely improvised. There was no, okay, say this. We need to make sure you say this word, 3 times today. None of that. Heather, Mike, and Josh had to come up with everything from the audition to everything they did before filming and then during filming. And that was, you really had to be able to think on your feet. So having the improv skills, I'm just going to use that short term today. Having improv skills is really what led those guys to being cast.
And how would you describe ultimately the three that were cast? What do you think drew the directors to the three of them?
Mike is your every man. Mike's the audience's character. So Mike's personality, for those of you that have ever had to spend any time around Mike Williams, he is one of the most down to earth, normal guys you'll ever meet, and he just brought that personality with him. And he kind of portrays that. If you look at the dossier and the Curse of the Blair Witch documentary, you know, he was brought in by Josh. Hey, you're a good sound guy. Why don't you come on? He's like, yeah, okay, this will be fun. You know, he doesn't have any skin in the game with the history of the Blair Witch. And, you know, Josh was always appeared to be, the character of Josh wanted to be the rock star. He wanted to be the filmmaker, you know, and have all the glitz and glamour. But he was also a type A personality, and the character of Josh was kind of an asshole. And Heather is your A personality. She's an alpha female. This is her project. She is taking charge. These guys are going to do what she says. And if she wants to get this shot and she needs to go get it, like, she was determined to make this documentary and make it her way. She had a strict vision of what she wanted. And Heather brought that to the audition. Josh brought his intensity, and I think Mike brought that softness that, you know, he's the one character that we can really relate to in the film. I'm not going out there. Like, you hear something in the woods, do you want to go out there? No, that's why we all chuckle at Mike in the movie, because he is us. He helps draw us into this adventure that they go on. And I think just having those, you know, Heather and Josh have a lot of similarities in their personality, and then Mike is really complete opposite. So I think he helps balance those two out and really help draw us in and really kind of care about it, because if it was just Josh and Heather, I don't think the audiences would care if anything happened to them or not. But having Mike there to soften the blow and bring a little bit of humanity out of those characters really helped us care what happened to these guys when they walk into the woods.
Amazing. Yeah, and I could see the dynamic between the three of them and how they played off of each other so well. And I have to say, I think subconsciously when I was younger, to see a woman take on the role of like the director, and she was so, you know, gung-ho and she was going to get the shot, I think that really swayed, you know, what I wanted to do with the rest of my life, because she was just so cool. And then very shortly after Blair Witch came out, I begged my dad, who was in news media, for a camera, and I got my first high 8 when I was, you know, 6, 7, 8, somewhere in that range, and I wanted to be like Heather. Even if I couldn't verbalize that when I was younger, it definitely, looking back, it's like seeing her be the leader, I always resonated with. So let's talk about so they auditioned technically, but it was through an improv type, like a long form audition. But then there was all these other people that were in the movie that were real people. And I was honored to meet some of these people back in March. And I have to say, I don't know if it's Maryland, and Michael, maybe you can speak on this, or it's just very specific, the people in the Blair Witch Project, nicest people I've ever met in my life. Specifically Ingrid and Susie. I enjoyed their company so much, and I got to interview them on the exact steps where they were in the Blair Witch Project 23 years prior. It was a surreal moment, and you'll get to see it next week in my documentary. But Matt, kind of talk about the process that the directors had to get these random people in this town, and why this town specifically.
Well, they drove around. I mean, that's how they found Burkittsville. They were looking for a certain aesthetic, and, you know, they found Burkittsville, and they said, okay, we got that. Now we have to find where else could they interview people that would know this? Well, probably a convenience store or a restaurant. And the gentleman that gives the exposition, Rustin Parr, he was a Planet actor. He was a local Maryland actor that they put out an audition for, and he showed up, and he had the perfect look, and they said, okay, you're going to do this, and your scene is here. And Ed's sister's actually the young waitress in the first restaurant where they go after Burkittsville. So she's a Planet actress. And then obviously Ed Swanson, our favorite fisherman, him and Jim King or Bob Griffin were Planet actors as well. But Susie and Ingrid, the best thing to come out of the story is that they were completely unaware that an actual film was being made. And Susie said she saw Heather walking around the diner in Brunswick with a camera asking people, and no one was helping her out. She thought, oh, these poor film students, no one's helping them, so I'll help them out. And completely improvised her scene outside of the Silver Rail Diner in Brunswick, Maryland, on the spot with Ingrid on her arm. She came up with everything about it, and it was perfect. She just saw what Heather was going for, said, oh yeah, I don't even go up there, or I saw a documentary about that. And just, she did it out of the kindness of her heart because she wanted to give this girl and these two guys like some sort of footage because they weren't getting anything. And that was the last any of the cast or crew ever saw of Susie or Ingrid until 2016. It took me probably 2 years to track them down, and because they're not credited in the film. If you look at the credits, there's no Susie Gooch, there's no Ingrid Gooch, obviously, because she was just about 3 at the time. So they were kind of like poof, gone in the wind. And when I was writing the book, I would tell my friends that I was working that knew that I was working on. I said, if I don't find these two, I am not going to feel that this book is complete, because it's such a fan favorite moment, especially because Ingrid is getting a little antsy, covering her mom's mouth, and Susie's just one of the sweetest, nicest people in the world. Just, gives this great performance on the spot, and had no clue that she was going to be in a feature-length film released to the audiences a little less than 2 years later.
And I have to say that it was surreal talking to Ingrid, who is now 23, 24-year-old woman, and she was an infant when they filmed the movie. And a little tidbit that I thought was so crazy, she was getting married shortly after I ended up meeting her, and she told me her maid of honor is named Blair. And I just thought that was
That's
so
awesome.
funny. And I was like, man, you can't escape it, huh? And she was like, no. But they were just so lovely, and I really was drawn to Susie. We had a really nice moment at the coffee shop we met all of them at, and Ed has been so lovely. He's reached out a few times since I met him there. And then Michael, we ended up meeting as well. And you were also so nice, and I got to interview you in the cemetery. And I don't know if you want people to know what you showed us, but I'll leave that for you to say publicly. But you showed us some cool stuff. And tell me about why Burkittsville. What was your initial thought of the town when you moved there? Because you're not originally from there. And what's it like living in the Blair Witch Project town?
It's actually very quiet here. We had originally moved to Brunswick. We lived there about 11 years. That was around 2005. And at one point I had no idea that any of the Blair Witch Project was shot there. And one time we just put the movie on, and we're watching, and we're like, wait a minute, that guy's being interviewed a block away from here. And then started realizing that, oh yeah, Burkittsville's 10 minutes from here. And so it was never really something that we like, oh, this is kind of cool, we should go up there sometime. And then we didn't, until my sister-in-law ended up moving there, and then we were in Burkittsville all the time. And we've really loved it, and a house became available, and we jumped on it. So we've been here for about 5 years now, and have kind of gotten involved with the community. Well, clearly, and it's just been it's we don't get a lot of people um, just showing up asking about the Blair Witch um, outside of October, and then in October you can tell usually people are looking around. Like, oh yeah, you're here about the movie? Yeah, and then they kind of have a look in their eyes, like, are you gonna run us out of town? I'm like, no, we'll show you the places that Matt has shown me, all the spots in the cemetery. So we just point out the little places, and occasionally you get somebody who's just gets disappointed when you tell them, no, there aren't a whole bunch of murdered children here, and like, I can't show you a bunch of dead kids. Sorry, they're not real, and but it's fun, and it's fun living in a place that like people want to come see because it's associated with the movie. But a lot of people in town just they kind of just don't care about it. It's something that was big 20 years ago. I've heard stories about what it was like in '99, and a lot of them conflict, which is kind of cool. But right now, it's like I don't even know if that many people who've been here a long time have even actually watched the movie. So a lot of the people I've talked to, there's like, yeah, I never saw it. Yeah, people showed up, but it's um, but it's something that 25 years later, people are still coming here to see the cemetery, and then we send them on to the other places where they filmed. Because only about 90 seconds of it was actually in the movie, and it's we just try to be friendly to the people who come out to want to see our little town.
And it is little, I have to
It's
say.
it's
It's a
we.
very small town.
It is a street. There's about 150 people who live here, and it takes us maybe 30 minutes to walk our dog around the town, and that's pretty much the entire town.
And it was all embellished with the story of the witch, etc. But there is a little bit of an eerie vibe to the town, I have to say. Like it definitely has an air to it that's kind of indescribable. Maybe that's like a placebo effect because I was walking in expecting to see a witch flying over my head, but it it does, and maybe it was super cold when we were there. It was super windy up on that hill where the cemetery was, and right as Jed and I were driving in, there was a freshly dead rabbit right in the middle of the road, and that really just set the tone, of course.
Well, we put those out every couple of weeks.
Yeah. That's your main duty as the mayor, is getting the fresh rabbits in the road.
Yeah, and to make sure that the ghosts are taken care of.
Exactly. As the new mayor, do you think you're going to lean into more of the history of this movie from the town you are now overseeing, or?
It is something that I think the town can definitely benefit from, and we have benefited from it. There's a couple of years ago, there was a fire in the post office, and the post office burned down, and it displaced a bunch of people who were living in the apartments that were right next to it. And Blair Witch fans raised a bunch of money to help those people out, which was great. So I think it's not something the association with the Blair Witch Project is not going to go away. And one of the things I do want to do is we need to own our part of that, and we can all benefit from it. And most of and pretty much everybody who has come out just to see the town and walk around and see the site have been very nice people, and it's I just I'm okay with leaning into that. I also want to get into the like, oh well, you're here for the movie, but we've got all this other history. There's Civil War history. There's a tree over there that Abraham Lincoln apparently ate lunch under. It's private property. Stay away from it. And it's like there's rye whiskey distilling in the town. There was, I'm probably wrong on this. I think Maryland's first car dealership, and also there's a history of women's education in the town too. So I know we're talking about Blair Witch. I can go down rabbit holes about the other stuff that happened here, but yeah, it is something I don't want to shy away from because, like I said, we're 25th anniversary is coming up in 2 years, and definitely want to be conscious of that and welcoming of the people who are going to come out here for it. Just don't steal any graveyard dirt.
I forgot to do that myself. No, I really enjoyed visiting there and also seeing all the other sites that Matt will get into in a second, I hope. But I think it's awesome. You're the mayor, and I think leaning into the history of this film being there is only going to benefit the town. So I think that's a great thing. But that was our first. We were there. I'm sorry.
Oh no, sorry, and I am working on getting the visitor center open, not just for the Blair Witch stuff, but for the just the town history in general. And one thing I do want to have up in there, and this is leading into the thing that you referenced earlier, is I do want to have a sign, one of the signs that looks like the one in the movie, up there, so people can get their picture in front of it. Stuff like that.
I would definitely say throw a couple of copies of 8 Days in the Woods in the gift shop too.
That is one of the many things on the agenda for that.
Awesome.
I put one in the little free library when I was there in October, and by the time I walked up to my car, someone had walked up and grabbed the copy. And I was
that's amazing.
Awesome.
What's she gonna do? So I went down and put another copy in there in case she decided to burn it, like she didn't want anyone else to read about it. So there's 2 of them floating around Burkittsville somewhere.
That's awesome.
Yeah, that would track with some book stuff around this area, but we'll go into that. But yeah, they're. I don't know if you want to talk about the signs later. I can go into that.
Yeah, we can get into the signs now if you want.
Yeah, so anyone who's been to Burkittsville in the past decade, if not longer, may have noticed that the Welcome to Burkittsville sign that's currently up looks nothing like the one in the movie, and that's because they started to disappear shortly after the movie came out, which is one of the things that kind of sort of soured the town on the movie, is that people are stealing our town signs. They're not cheap. So the ones in the movie, it's a blue and gray sign, although it looks black and white in the film. And Haxman was gracious enough to replace them with metal signs, and which was fine until one morning when the farmers woke up and noticed the sign that was across from his property still sitting there, but there was a chain and a bumper around the post that it was on, because somebody tried to just yank it out of the ground and ended up losing their bumper. So that was the point where the town was like, all right, we should just change them so nobody cares to take them. So there was a contest to redesign the sign. Somebody local came up with what we currently have, but the signs that look like they're in the signs from the film are mostly in currently undisclosed location, except for I currently have one that's in my care, and Blair and Jed got to hold that when they were in town. I hope you didn't get tetanus from it.
No tetanus, but yeah, I didn't know what the protocol was of saying I got to hold the real sign.
You posted a picture of it, so it's not like it's not out there.
Well, to be fair, Jed did.
Jed posted it. Yeah,
I was like, I guess we're telling people then. Yeah. But yeah, so you have the sign, and hopefully there'll be one for people to see in your new visitor center. But Matt has something even cooler, I think, and I also now have a piece of that, as well as Jed. The infamous house that is in the ending of the movie. You want to talk about that, Matt?
Yeah, the house is my absolute favorite part of the film. There's just something about seeing that house that just sparked something in me. And I got to see the house in the spring of 2000 while it was still up, and by that point I was not the first fan to go there. It had already started to show signs of wear and tear from fans visiting. But it fell down. in the fall 2005, 2006. It finally came down, and the park came and took out all the big parts. So if you go to where the house is, you are especially at this point, you are not going to know that the house from the Blair Witch Project stood in this little clearing in the woods. But if you go out there and it's the wintertime and you look down, you're like, oh, there's a piece of rock. Oh, that's not rock, that's stucco, and there's chicken wire in it. There's brick. So there's like a debris field just under the dirt. Quarter of an inch. You kick your foot, you're gonna find, oh, there's a part of the house. So I like little mementos like that, dirt, siding, something to take back. So I've got a few pieces of the house that I've kept over the years, and because it's not there anymore, and it's just really neat to see it, what the color of the walls were, the what the house felt like, and because the house was built in the mid 1800s, and it was called the Griggs House, and it was actually, from what my research has found, is there was a freed slave family named the Griggs that lived there. And there was two other houses in the area, but the Griggs house was the one that they had found back in '97 while they were location hunting. And it's just neat to be out there because when we go out there, I was out there 2000. I didn't go back until 2013, and I didn't know where I was because it was gone, and I stepped on something and it moved, and I looked down. There's a big square piece of granite, which was the foundation of the house. And then I looked over and there's a big square metal piece. And I said, okay, that's it. We're here. So we were pulling the weeds back and digging, and there's just parts of the house everywhere. So a friend of ours, Aaron, and myself, we've really kind of mapped out where the basement would have been, where Mike was standing in the corner, based on where all the debris is and everything. And this is where it was. And it's really not that far behind an old surface-to-air missile base from the Cold War. There's this huge chain-link fence right on the main road that used to house surface-to-air missiles in case the Russians decided to try to bomb us. They would shoot the missiles up out of these army bases on the East Coast to protect us. And the house is probably, 75 yards back behind that. So it's really not that deep into the woods. And just to be out there is neat because you can look and, oh, there's this part of the house, and there's at one point a huge section of wall was there. But yeah, just to have a little piece of that memento, sitting on the mantle is just kind of neat because it's not there anymore. And the house was falling down in '97. At this point, it was dangerous to be in at that point, and the Haxon guys actually had to go and shore up some of the steps and the flooring just to make sure that they didn't fall through and hurt themselves for real, because that would have been absolutely devastating. But it's just neat to think that this house looks like it's in the middle of nowhere. It's a couple hundred yards from a main road in a neighborhood, and it was one of the most chilling moments of the film when Mike's reaction in the film is his reaction to actually seeing the house for the first time. They did not know the house was there. They were camped probably 50 or 60 yards from the front door, but obviously they only had flashlights and the light on the camera, so they couldn't see. They were dropped off and said, here's your coordinates, walk, go to sleep. And then they hear the recording of Josh screaming, and then when Mike walks up in the house, he's like, holy shit, it's a house. It's the first time they saw it, and it's just ominous that you can only see it based on the light from the camera. So it's one of those like iconic houses to me that, along with the Amityville Horror, the Bates Motel, just those structures that just kind of give you that sense of dread. And it's just kind of neat to go back there and revisit that from time to time.
And that house is in Seneca State Park.
Patapsco State Park.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, Patapsco.
How do you say it?
Patapsco.
Patapsco. Okay, got it.
Yeah, it's about 40 minutes from every other filming location. It's kind of out of the way.
So we walked the path through those woods and got to the Coffin Rock, which is also in the film. And I found it very interesting how they actually shot this movie out in the woods with these people. Can we talk about how they just left them out there, but they were leaving these, like, in the film canisters, the little notes, and on, you know, walkie, and they would just leave them things here and there, like, you know, points that they would have to um, get food and whatnot. Can you kind of talk about the filming and the process out in these woods?
Yeah. So Greg Hale, like I said, was trained special forces in the U.S. Army, so he knew wilderness survival. And before we had Google Maps and Waze and stuff on our phone, you know, and they still make them, but they were given a handheld GPS device. And the filmmakers months prior would walk this basically like an obstacle course. They would walk, okay, we're going to go here. This will be waypoint 1. Put the coordinates in, waypoint 2, whatever. So before going into the woods, they gave Heather, Mike, and Josh a GPS unit and said, okay, put in waypoint 1, be there by 3 o'clock. And then they would get to waypoint 1, and there would be a milk crate with a bicycle flag on it. And inside the milk crate would be batteries, food, videotapes, film for the film camera, and inside the little film canisters, there were directing notes. Like I said, there was no script, there was no dialogue, and inside, Heather would pick hers up and say, okay, you got to keep these guys on track. They want to goof off. You know, get them going. We need to move. Mike's would be, I really don't want to be here. I really just kind of want to go home. And Josh would be like, you're getting tired of Heather's shit. You really need to get her stuff together. You don't need to shoot everything. But they didn't know what each other's notes were. So they would act and react based on what they saw each other say and do, which is how we got the dynamic we did. Because Mike would be like, I want to go. And Heather's like, no, we got to go. And Josh is like, Jesus Christ, let's just, you know, and that precipitated a lot of the arguments that we saw on film and that we didn't see, because they really started getting into it. It was improv, and it was a lot of quote unquote method. They had a safe word, and if they said the safe word, they were out of character. And then they would say the safe word again, and they would get back in character and keep the camera rolling. And they knew that they had to get to this waypoint by this time because they didn't carry their camping equipment. They didn't carry the tent. They didn't carry their sleeping bags. So next time you watch the movie, look at their backpacks. They ain't carrying a tent. They ain't carrying sleeping bags. Their camp was broken down by the crew in the morning after they left, and then it would be set up at that next day's waypoint for the camp. And for the first couple of days, they kind of kept closer to them in the woods. They would set up little blinds at certain waypoints so they can make sure that they were getting there. And they also had a walkie-talkie so that if something did happen, they could radio and say, the CP's not working. But the crew would leave them alone to make the movie on their own. They were just out there to make sure that they weren't getting lost, that something didn't happen, that they weren't reporting it, and to make sure, you know, the equipment was working, because they had one 16 millimeter camera, they had one DAT machine, and they had the main high 8 camera. So they had to make sure that if something were to happen, they could get to them quickly so that it didn't make it worse. And there were a few times that the crew would review the camera or the camera footage from the night before and kind of pull them aside in the woods in the morning and say, okay, I looked at the footage yesterday, let's do more of this, or let's do less of this, or try to do this. But they really kind of kept hands off because they wanted it to feel natural. They wanted it to be what they were experiencing in the woods, the fatigue, being woken up at night, hiking miles and miles in the terrain, carrying this equipment, which was not light, going off trail, and having to deal with these emotions while creating these scenarios, because all the scenarios were vaguely laid out. So they had to react to them and really make the performance their own, because Ed and Dan, they couldn't see what the cast was doing until they got the video footage back. So they would take the high 8 footage and review it at night and then create their directing notes for the next day. So if they saw something really, really good, they would say, okay, Mike, do this today. You know, Heather yesterday made you mad. Today you kind of want to make up with her. So they would help direct them based on what the actors were giving them, less so than Ed and Dan trying to direct it and it wasn't coming across naturally. So that's kind of how they did that.
I just linked what I think is this your website, Matt?
What do you got?
Blair Witch Experience.
That is the website for the Blair Witch Experience event. Yes.
Okay, cool. Just real quick, tell people what that is and what you do.
So the Blair Witch So the Blair Witch Experience is the annual tour event that I run. We start in Burkittsville and we hit up all of the major out of the woods locations that was used in the film, and then we do go and visit Coffin Rock. We do go to the woods where they hung the stick men. The little shack shanty thing that Mike says is right up the road from Coffin Rock. The Fisherman's Rock is there. Saturday night, if you're so inclined, there's a campsite up in Ellicott City in Patapsco State Park that you can come and camp. And I show behind the scenes footage, stuff that the filmmakers shot while making the movie. And then Sunday morning, we go to where the house was. And we I give you anecdotal stuff like this. And a lot of local cast and crew tend to come out and hang out. They really love doing this. It's a fun experience just because, especially the in the woods stuff, it's hard to get people navigated in the woods if you're not there. So it's nice to go and find where the stickmen were hung, and the rock piles are down away and up a huge hill without a trail. It's a pain in the butt to get to, and a couple years ago we recreated all the stone piles, so carrying rocks up a mountain is not fun. But I had to go recreate those rock piles. So if anyone happens along there and they know the film was made there, they can have something kind of fun to see.
And you did hike Jed and I out in those woods, and I almost tripped a few times because it is quite literally out in the woods. Like, there is no trail really. You have to hop over some logs. So it's a really cool experience if y'all are inclined. But I want to talk about real quick the very famous scene with Heather where she is, basically accepting that she's not going to get out of here, and she's got the camera at a low angle and she's crying. How did that come about?
That was part of her directing notes. That was filmed in Patapsco State Park the night that their next to last night of filming. And the directing notes was, okay, you resigned yourself to this. You're not getting out of here. Go and say your goodbyes, do your confessional. And she turned the light on and she turned the camera towards herself, and the high 8 camera that was used did not have a viewfinder. So she had no way of knowing if she was in frame or not, which led to the accidental framing of her face, which is now synonymous with this film. I mean, you can't talk about this film and not think about her eyes and that snot bubble and the tears rolling out of her face. And she was just told, walk out into the woods and say your goodbyes. And that was all Heather. There was no other directing beyond that. And in the one quote unquote deleted scene that I wished was in it, Mike also recorded one of those as well inside the tent. And Mike being Mike, he's smiling, and he's accepting of his fate, and he's trying to not have anyone feel bad and everything. And that ultimately was deleted, and I wished it was still in there. It was shown on TV one time on FX in 2000 when the film was broadcast. It was a little bonus feature at the end, but it's never been released anywhere else. But again, that was all Heather. She did all that herself.
And Heather hasn't really done anything since Blair Witch, correct?
She had some acting in the early to mid 2000s, but I think the quote unquote backlash that a film as popular as the Blair Witch Project, as popular as that film is, there's always the backlash, and it's always twice as loud, twice as in your face as anyone praising something. And I just don't think she wanted that in her life. She didn't. It wasn't conducive to her mental health, and she just kind of decided she didn't want to deal with Hollywood and acting, and kind of walked away from it. And unfortunately, she doesn't really do much in regards to the Blair Witch Project. She'll interact with fans from time to time if they see her online and talk to her, but it's not something she gravitates towards or seeks out at this point.
Yeah, I can only imagine I mean, that is on your name for the rest of your life. And that was one of the questions I asked Ingrid when I was there is, has this bothered you that you are the baby in this movie? And it's a little different, obviously. She's not the main character, but, even her little bit, she is known as that. And I think she mentioned some very famous band or something, like, reached out to her at one point just because of her, cameo essentially in Blair Witch Project. So, yeah, I mean, if you're in a film that's that big, that's your title for life. So I hope it wasn't too, scarring for her, but I'm sure it was pretty rough for a while. But um, so the filmmakers were writing scenes as they went based off of what was happening out in the woods, or did they kind of keep it more rigid? How did they go about, you know, pushing the narrative, so to speak?
Well, they knew each day was going to have a set of scenarios that they needed to have happen. So they knew, okay, this day we need to get the cast to this point, and we'll give them little micro directions to say, to try to pivot them in a certain direction. And then they'll say, okay, this is the night that we're going to shake the tent. So they had to get them there, but then that was okay. This is our first big scare night, and this night is our next night, and this will be the rock pile night. Um, and they would, throughout, each night they would film the footage. They would just kind of give them little micro directions to say, okay, I need less antagonism. I need more. I need more. You want to get out of here. Stop fighting with each other. Start, worrying about how you're going to get home or what's going to happen if you don't get home. So they would pivot that a little bit each day, but not really make big swings at what they were trying to get. Just try to make sure that they were in place at a certain waypoint on a certain day to make sure that this was what they had planned, because they lost an entire day because of the rain. That rain scene in the film, what they filmed that rain day was all they got, and they actually had to redo the entire day the next day, but they didn't use any footage from that day at all because it ended up being a waste. They went back and did it, and none of the footage really worked. They were already agitated at each other, so they were out there for an extra day that they really didn't need to, trying to make up a day that, and they ended up using all the rain stuff anyway.
So was there ever a point where it kind of came to a head with the actors? Because that is a lot to ask actors to do, is go out in the woods literally with nothing, basically, and have these extremely emotional scenes, be scared, be alone, etc., etc. Was there ever a moment where they almost quit or anything dramatic happened behind the scenes?
Well, in a
Yeah, I
lot of
was
the
gonna
footage,
wonder if anyone ever used the safe word or had to step away. That'd be just horrible if it was overwhelming.
well, they would use taco to break scenario, say, okay, we've been walking about for a while, let's taco and just kind of rest for a minute. Looking at the footage, I think probably by the second day in the woods, they started noticing that Mike and Josh were really being berated by Heather. Like, Heather was really coming down on these guys. So they did pull her aside one morning and said, "Look, you gotta lighten up. You're gonna lose these guys, and like for real, like these guys will not want to be around if you keep berating them." And I think it was really the first night that they hear stuff, and Mike doesn't want to come out of the tent. Like, she really berated him in extended scenes that we didn't get to see, and that was really, they could see it in Josh and Mike's reactions to Heather when they were looking at the footage, that Ed and Dan had to step in and be like, "Hey, dial it back, because it's at this point, if you keep arguing, alls we're going to have is arguing. You guys are not going to learn how to work together to get out of here. It's not going to be enjoyable for anyone that's going to watch this film to see." And at that point, you would want everybody to die, so you don't have any sympathy. The ending of the film wouldn't work unless, if you want everyone to die by 40 minutes into the film, the rest of the film's not going to be effective. So that was really kind of the only time that they kind of intervened. It was originally planned that Mike was going to be removed out of the tent instead of Josh, but they had decided after about the third or fourth day, they were like, let's pull Josh out because the last, quarter of the movie will just be Mike and Heather, who worked a little bit better than it would have just been Josh and Heather. So that they made that call on the fly, and told Josh that the day of that he was getting pulled out. Mike didn't know, obviously, and they didn't know that that was going to happen, but they pivoted in a meeting on their own back at their house to say, all right, let's pull Josh out and let's leave Mike and Heather in, because it had always been Josh and Heather in the final scene until they got them in the woods and saw how they were interacting.
And what did they tell them when it was all over? Like, they were just like, all right, thanks, go home, bye, or what was that conversation like?
It was, a lot of congratulations, and it was a lot of, you guys did a great job. I mean, they looked at what they had and they thought, okay, this is awesome stuff. Because originally, the footage in the woods was supposed to be a micro part of the final film. Curse of the Blair Witch, the sci-fi documentary, was really what the film was intended to be. So they were filming this stuff in the woods so that they could cut to it and say, hey, here's them coming up on these stick men, and this is, how their demeanor changed, and they are finally resigning themselves that they're not getting out of the woods. So it was a long and grueling process. Again, it was 8 days, should have only been 7, and they were giving them less and less food. They were marching them in circles. They weren't giving them a lot of sleep. So the cast was very relieved. They were like, thank God we can take a shower. And they were able to switch it off, pretty quickly. And ultimately they knew what was happening. They knew that it was obviously a movie. So they were able to shake it off at the end of a grueling production and say, okay. And basically it was, all right, we're going to finish the other half of the film. We'll stay in touch. We'll keep you guys apprised as to what's going on. But pretty much was they got out of the woods and, got them showered and rested, and they sent them back to New York a day or two later.
And did they have to like prep them for essentially their faux disappearance, or was that not planned ahead of time?
That was not planned ahead of time. That was kind of a byproduct of the reaction that people were having online to the film. They were the first instance of that would have been Heather, Mike, and Josh did not attend the Sundance premiere. So had they attended Sundance, it would have just completely destroyed the world, the myth that they were building, that this was quote unquote real. So them not going to Sundance was kind of like the first, like, oh, this sucks. But then they were like, well, maybe we have something here. And it did bother them a little bit because they wanted to get out and promote the movie. They wanted to get out and say, hey, look what we did. But they could see why they weren't being brought in for interviews. And it wasn't until a couple of weeks after the movie came out that they were showing up on Letterman and Craig Kilborn and MTV and all this stuff. After that had kind of died down and people were like, oh, it's just a movie. And then it obviously surprised a lot of people when they showed up. Like, wait, I thought you were dead. You mean this isn't real? So again, early days of the internet, nobody knew anything, and it just caught everybody by storm, and they were kind of making it up as they went along. Imagine a movie coming out and the actors just aren't being interviewed. No one's talking about it. Their Twitter goes silent. Their Instagram goes silent. They're like, hey, first day on the set, and you don't see them for a year or 6 months. You can never do that again, which is why this film still 23 years later is still the pinnacle of how to promote a movie and make it effective with doing almost nothing.
That guerrilla marketing. So who came up with the idea of the website, and did that come before or after production?
Well, the website for Haxon came about because John Pearson needed to get them off their website. And Ed had some coding background, so he was able to make a rudimentary website with a message board. and they got everyone off of John's site and said, okay, come over to the Hacks and Boards. This is where we'll let you guys know as we dig through the footage and all the evidence that the police are giving us and everything. And the website that everyone is that remembers from 1999 really was the website that was there before the film got big at Sundance. They just turned the dial up. They got rid of the message board kind of went away a little bit. It was still there, but they started embedding more audio clips and video clips to keep people there. But it wasn't used to really promote it like a movie website does now. Coming soon from Lionsgate. The Blair Witch Project. Watch this. It was just, here's the website about the footage we found so that people are aware of what happened. And everything that Artisan did after buying the movie was the exact same thing that Haxon was doing prior. All they did was just have a bigger audience and a bigger sandbox paycheck to play in to make sure the website could handle all the traffic.
And go ahead, Andrew. Did you have something?
I was just going to say, it absolutely was that, like you're describing, Matt, just very stripped down. You visited the site and it seemed to be just informative, not like it was even tied to an entertainment project. And one thing that has been on my mind as we've kind of gotten into this discussion a little bit more is how, in a way, when the phenomena surrounding the Blair Witch Project and Curse of the Blair Witch being a mockumentary that most people didn't know was part of the film narrative, it really followed in this huge wave of 90s true crime. And there were a lot of documentaries that were coming out on like HBO and other channels that focused on real incidents that almost seemed, when the Blair Witch hit, to just be a little bit too close to home. And one that really stands out to me is the West Memphis 3, especially related to the Coffin Rock story. So I wonder, Blair, as an expert in true crime and someone who has done so much research in the field, if you even remember or have looked back on the things being related.
Well, again, I was young when the movie first came out, but I think there was a lot of things that subconsciously happened when I first saw the website, which is still up, by the way, in its exact state it was back in the 90s, right, Matt?
A little bit. I know Haxon had changed it when the 2016 came out. It was an old Adobe Flash website, so technically it doesn't work like it used to, but you should be able to pivot to the internet archive, archive.org, I think it is, and you can go back and look at the website as it was. That way it kind of gives you an idea of what we were experiencing back in 99.
It always reminded me of like a GeoCities site or like a personally made, not professionally, just very raw. And again, that kind of just the facts, which I think really got a lot of people.
Yeah, I mean, it added to the lore of these kids and just the overall world that was built. But to go back to your initial question, I mean, again, I think, you go back in your mind and you just think of all these big moments from your life growing up, whether it's a film or hearing a song for the first time or seeing a piece of art, whatever, that kind of stirs you and it excites you. And I just remember the buzz that was happening among young children. I mean, we were in elementary school when it came out in my age group, millennials. And it was a big deal. And it perpetuated well into middle school that it really happened, that everybody wanted to believe that this was a real, not only witch, but a real documentary. And, the website just contributed to that so much. I think for me personally, it's just a little bit of the ingredient in the mixing bowl that is me. But definitely, I can see the correlation between true crime and the Blair Witch Project. I mean, it is, I mean, technically a true crime, and that's how it's kind of presented. But um, I also am curious, Matt, what do you think? What do you think that ultimately happened in the editing room? Like, how did they determine? Because I've read the book and I've seen the other documentary that I'm not supposed to have seen, and what I thought was crazy was how much footage they had and that they got within that span of 8 days. How did they decide what the hell to put in the thing?
Yeah, they shot about 22 hours of footage over the course of 8 days between the high 8 and the 16 millimeter, and they would review it every
Oh,
day, and they
wow.
would, yeah, yeah, and it's, I would say, of that 22 hours, there's at least 4 hours of footage before they even get through day one. Like, they were shooting a lot while they were actually out in town. So the good thing was is that they were able to look at the camera footage every day. So they could already pick out the highlights. So there's a lot of footage out there of them walking and talking, but really nothing that progresses, that pushes the narrative, that pushes the story forward. So they could, basically take a time code and say, okay, from 2:45 to 8:12, good stuff. And they would keep that. And they would, use those as notes, and they would know, okay, we know what we have here, and then they could transfer all of that into the computer and know where their time codes were and start building that narrative. Say, okay, here's the story that they shot in the woods, and it was, the first assembly, they got it down to 8 hours, and then they got it down to about a 3.5 hour feature length, where they actually screened that 3.5 hours at the Enzion Theater in the summer of 1998. And at that point, they were doing what they called phase two, which was almost all of the stuff we see in Curse of the Blair Witch, the expert documentary, the interviews with other townsfolk, the history with the interviews with the family members. So they had phase one in the can. They narrowed it down to about 3 hours to say, okay, here's where we're going to pick from. Let's go film phase two. And that's what they did in 1998. And they screened it at the Enzion, and Christian Guevara, a friend of the Filmmakers who had helped out a little bit, had invited a producer, Kevin Fox, to come to the screening. He said, hey, Kevin, come see this and tell us what you think. Kevin walks out of the screening seeing this 3.5 hour rough cut of just the woods footage, and he finds Ed and Dan. He says, okay, what's your plan? They're like, oh, we're doing this, and he goes, no, you have your film. Don't do anything else. They're like, what do you mean? We have all of this other footage. He says, take that footage and put it in a cabinet and lock it. Don't touch it. Which really was counterproductive to what they were trying to do. They're like, well, we're trying to put these two together to make this movie. And he's like, no. You've got your movie. Don't worry about it. We'll figure that stuff out elsewhere. So they were trying to fill it. I've always said they try to fit a square peg in a round hole. Your phase one is all the kids stuff, and then phase two is all your backstory. But Kevin saw it as, you don't need the backstory in the film. So as they're trying to edit it, Dan and Ed, at the time it was a good idea, but when they look back now, they were like, why did we do this? They each went and made their own separate edits of the film. So one edit would show the kids' footage, would cut to an expert, cut back into the woods, and do that throughout the film. And then another edit was, well, we'll just have kind of bumpers. We'll introduce what we're going to go see, we'll watch it, and we'll cut to the analysis at the end. And they showed it to Greg Hale, and at this time they had brought on Mike Manello as a producer. He had done the Florida Film Festival, and another friend of theirs from college, and Rob Cowie, who was helping them secure financing and festivals and all this stuff. And they essentially got to the fall of '98, and they had a big come to Jesus meeting in their office that said, look, we have to figure out what we're going to do with this. We need you guys to either get together and come up with one cohesive edit of the film, or we need to shelve it. This is what we need to do. And they kept going back to what Kevin Fox had said, and really it was hard for them to really swallow, because they had spent so much time and money to do phase two. and they had spent all of 1998 doing it. For them to shelve all of this footage was hard. So they made the decision, said, okay, let's go with this footage. And I think that really made them nervous because there's no context about what people are about to watch other than that title card of, in October of 1994, 3 student filmmakers go into the woods near Burkittsville, Maryland, and a year later their footage was found. They're like, well, what are they going to know? And they put it together and they started to see it. And Mike Manello famously said many times in interviews, because the film was found in the edit. They had the film in 1997 and they didn't know it. But they didn't know it until they started looking at it differently from their original idea. So taking 22 hours of footage and getting 82 solid minutes from that was hard, because they felt, well, we have all this extra stuff. What are we going to do? How are people going to know? And like Kevin said, we'll figure that out. We can do something else. And that something else ended up becoming Curse of the Blair Witch, where they took some of the footage they shot in 98, and then when Artisan said, okay, we really want to do an accompanying piece, gave them money to go out and basically crank up the volume on phase 2 and kind of mix it in, which is why I say, if you look at Curse, that was the original vision of the Blair Witch. Now, a lot of us really like Curse of the Blair Witch because it's a great companion piece. But would we be sitting here talking about it 23 years later if Curse of the Blair Witch was the film we got?
My answer is no.
Exactly.
I think that the ambiguity of the original is what makes it special. And this is actually, as a creative, something that is really hard to learn, is less is more most of the time. And it's scarier, especially in this genre, to know less about the antagonist, about the villain, the evil witch in the woods, and the fact that you don't get that kind of backstory really. And at the end of the movie, we have our leads in the corner. It's one of the scariest, images in modern cinema, because you create what happens to them in your own mind. So
I mean, that entire film was made within the budget that they had. They had this grandiose plan at one point. One of the early ideas was they get to this house and they'll go down into the basement. Well, they have to dig a basement out. They're like, well, we can't dig out a basement and make an entire house. They're like, well, what if we find a house and the camera drops and it gets picked up and it's at the height of a child, and it's one of the ghosts or the spirits of one of the kids that Rustin Parr killed, and they're walking around with the camera now. And they started, as they progressed and got through their drafts, if you want to call it, of what the story was, they were like, we don't need that. And that's why you don't see the witch or whatever is haunting them, is they couldn't afford it. So let's just do what we can. We don't need to show it, but we as audiences are conditioned to see the big reveal in the third act of the monster, or the big reveal of when the killer takes off his mask and it's a Scooby-Doo moment. And the ending of Mike standing in the corner, they thought of that 2 days before they filmed it. They're like, we need an ending. Well, how are we going to end it? I don't know. Well, let's have Mike go in the basement and put him in the corner, and then we'll have Heather come down and we'll knock her down. Like something's down there waiting for her. They came up with that while they were filming the movie.
And this is just a testament to the creative process and the lightning in the bottle effect. I mean, I've been on enough film sets, behind and in front of the camera, where you make decisions on the fly and you don't know if that's going to be received well by the audience, but you have to make a decision and you have to push forward. And I think Blair Witch ultimately is such an amazing example of not only indie filmmaking, but just the creative process and like what it takes to get to point A to point B. And I think, yeah, it's for me personally, it's one of the most perfect films ever made because of the raw, organic storytelling that's happening in it.
Sometimes you have to trust your filmmakers. We always see filmmakers depicted in movies as being very esoteric, and they have these grand visions of, what their film is going to be. But sometimes you have to let the filmmaker make the movie that they're trying to make, because they know the story best. But that's why you have a team around you that can help you bring that vision to life. And each person that was making that film played their part exactly as they needed to, because they were all in the same direction. They all believed in each other. They knew that they could do it. They didn't know how it was going to turn out. Nobody knew. But they said, this will work because we're not trying to go above and beyond what our budget is. We're not, if they would have had a rubber monster running around there, that film would have been dead in the water. It wouldn't have gotten to Sundance. But not showing it because, well, we didn't have any money for it, so what are we going to do? Well, let's just not show it. You don't need to. Like you said, our imagination is going to create the worst thing imaginable more than anything we'll see on screen. And that's what they went with.
And Jed, you just missed my very poignant description of the creative process, but I'm happy you're here because you were my co-pilot at the Burkittsville, Maryland trip we took in March. So welcome.
Hey guys, sorry I couldn't be here at the start. I was busy saving horror somewhere else.
Awesome. Great to see you, Jed.
Hey, bud.
Good to see you guys.
Well, Jed, we've had a lot of really cool discussions. As you can see, you got Matt and Michael here. We're about to get to the point where I wanted to open the floor to questions. So we'll start with you. Did you have any questions? I know you know Blair Witch like the back of your hand, but anything else you want to learn?
About Blair Witch Project. Well, I am one of the rare people to have watched the making of the Blair Witch documentary, which filled in some of the gaps that I had, and hopefully one day that gets released, because some of the stuff from the behind the scenes that haven't been released is incredible. And when I watched it, I was blown away, just because it feels like you're watching. It makes the Blair Witch Project feel real when you see that Heather and the guys were in character from way before we see them in the Blair Witch Project, and that just is incredible. And I just want more of that. I want them to release the longer version. They could genuinely make a prequel. So for anyone that knows, does anyone know if Artisan or whoever will ever let that documentary be released?
I think it's less Artisan and more to do with the documentary filmmaker and some of those involved, because that was done outside of Artisan using their own footage. Whether or not Artisan can facilitate that and jump in and say, hey, yeah, we're going to put a disc out. You guys have this documentary. They have to clear up some rights issues and stuff. But other than that, if Paxson could have released that already, I know they would have.
I hope they do at some point. I'd love to see it.
Yeah, it's just again, I don't want to talk about things that no one can watch, but like just the stuff with the audition process, which I thought was incredibly interesting, because with found footage you have to be really like on the ball when it comes to that, because it carries your entire movie. So for them to find this trio of people who work together like they've been friends for a longer time, and just finding Heather Donahue, like I know she's changed her name to wherever it is now, but like, wow, she is incredible. And I know straight after the film came out, she got a lot of stick from just the internet people for her acting, and just because she played a little bit more of the abrasive type of character. But she's incredible, like straight up incredible, and she needs to get her flowers, because she is amazing. And yeah, I wish she was still acting now, because I would legit put Heather in everything. But I've looked into it, and I don't think she wants to do that for a long time.
Yeah, she's a very lovely person, and I think she unjustly got a lot of the focused blowback of the movie, because it's her face on the poster, and she's they use their real name, and that's and everyone kind of looks back now, it's like, oh, maybe we shouldn't have done that. But I don't think it would have been as effective. So I think a lot of people, like you said, Jed, the abrasiveness that, the character of Heather brings to the film was unjustly applied to the real Heather. And it's just, she knew that, I can't deal with this. I'm just going to leave it instead of sitting, festering in it and trying to be a part of it. And, as a fan, I wish she was more outward with, attending conventions or doing Q&As or being more involved in it. I understand it. I don't like it, but I totally get it for her own, mental health. It might be the best thing for her. But I hope that would maybe change someday. But, you never know.
Did she change her name because of Blair Witch Project? Or
I think she changed her Facebook name, and it's a family name. I think it's just another degree of separation so that she does not get inundated every day with message requests and friend requests from people just because she's Heather from the Blair Witch.
I totally understand that. And yeah, like Jed said, I think she definitely deserves her flowers, because not only is she in one of the most classic horror films of all time, she really makes the movie, in my opinion. And like I said earlier, I think maybe she doesn't even understand the impact that she had on young women, because she certainly did for me. And I think, like I said, subconsciously, she may have even pushed me into the direction that I am following now, which is trying to be a female filmmaker. But
no one, and sorry, but no one thought about that back then. Like, we never had those conversations about what a strong lead Heather was. Like, she wasn't ever talked about in the same vein of a Ripley or another strong female lead. But when you look back now, with 2022 glasses, she's pretty strong. Like, she's not running away. Like, she went full bore into the woods to create this documentary, and in the face of adversity, she kept filming. She's like, we need to figure out what this is. And the abrasiveness, it's the character of Heather brought that on, and she really brought that to life. But yeah, she's definitely a very strong female lead. She did not shy away from wanting to confront whatever it was, because she's a filmmaker. The character is a filmmaker, and she needs to see it. She wouldn't, if she would have got out of the woods and not seen anything and captured it on film, I think the character would have been very disappointed. And to me, she would have made the mistake of wanting to go back into the woods.
But I'd go further than that. I think if it wasn't for Heather Donahue, if any other actress was in that role, I don't think the Blair Witch Project would have taken hold like it has.
Agreed.
Because
Yeah.
it all hangs on Heather. And so the biggest horror film of all time in terms of return on investment is Blair Witch Project, and it hangs on her. Like following the Blair Witch Project, she had very small parts. I mean, I know she did a TV show for a little while, but her film roles were really, she just did like bad horror movies basically for a little while. And it's such a shame, because wow, she's incredible. I wish she would just get back into acting and do more movies, even if it isn't horror. I think she's incredible. Oh, I just wanted to say hello to Adrian, who is also a found footage master with Be My Cat, a film for Anne, which I absolutely love, and also blurs the line between fact and fiction so well. And Adrian plays a psychopath in it, really, but a brilliant, entertaining one. Hey, Adrian.
Hi, Jed, and hi, everyone. Thanks for the introduction. Well, I actually wanted to ask about, does anyone know about Heather? Like, what happened exactly to her? I mean, so seriously withdrew from acting, from anything film related. Like, what, like that backlash? I mean, she was harassed on the streets, online. Like, what happened actually?
1 second, guys. I am so sorry to cut you off, Adrian, but our dear mayor has to head out, and I just wanted to send him off with a proper goodbye and thank you for being here. I really appreciated you taking the time to speak with everybody, and again, congratulations on being the mayor of Burkittsville. That's fucking awesome.
Hey, congrats, Michael.
Oh, thank you,
Mr. Mayor. I'm gonna come and see you. And do you have like a big medal around your neck like mayors do in London?
I can't. Well, you held the big metal. I tried doing it with
That's right.
the sign, and it's there's some back problems now that probably should be looked into. Um, Spine
Um,
shouldn't pop right out, should it?
I'm gonna I'll meet you in Bats in the Belfry in about 2 months' time, 3 months' time.
All right, yeah. Let me know. I'll definitely happy to have you in town again, and
Awesome.
hopefully it won't be as windy next time.
Yeah.
And cold.
I can control that now.
Well, everybody, if you want to hear more from Michael and see his face, he is also in my Blair Witch documentary coming out next week. So if you check my YouTube, that'll be up soon. So thank you again, Michael, and hopefully I'll see you in Burkittsville sometime in the future.
All right. Well, thank you for having me, and I encourage everybody to do the Blair Witch experience if you can.
Yeah, thank you, Michael, and
Thanks,
keep
Mike.
us posted on how Burkittsville celebrates Halloween, and if there are more in the woods screenings of Blair Witch. We'd all love to come.
There may be something coming up in the, let's say, in about a year.
Awesome.
But more on that later.
Awesome.
So,
Awesome. Keep us up to date, man.
We'll do. All right.
Bye-bye.
I'm going to leave quietly.
Okay. So, Adrian's question, Matt, do you want to answer that?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, Adrian, it was a combination. I think Heather took the blowback of the film very personally. She was, she's the face of the film. Her face is on the poster. And it was probably just too much for her. I've never spoken to her about it. I can only kind of go off how other people observed and the little bit that she's talked about it. Some people can handle it and brush off, and some people, it affects them more than I think that they would like. So she did the only thing I think she thought she could do, was to remove herself from that environment. She's never going to not be the girl from the Blair Witch Project, just like Mike or Josh aren't going to be Mike and Josh from the Blair Witch Project. And I think she wanted something different out of her life. Famously, she went out and grew medical marijuana. She lives a very quiet life now. She does her thing. She knows she's not going to escape it, but she's not one to be inviting of the film. She's kind of, gotten rid of all of her mementos that she had kept from filming. She famously, I think in Grow Girl, she talks about the film over the course of like a page, where she just takes her jacket and leaves it on a fence somewhere in downtown Los Angeles that she wore in the film. She wanted to get rid of it. So I think, Heather's choice to not really invite the Blair Witch into her life is her choice. And a lot of fans wish that were different. I respect her choice. She was the only person that I reached out to be interviewed for my book that did not get interviewed. So that was
That's a shame.
Yeah, I wanted to make sure that my book was not intended to be read as a tabloid. So I want to make sure that, from what I know of her story, that it's represented. She was, like I think Jed had said, if anyone else had been in that role, I don't think the film would have been as effective. And, she was a huge part of that film's success, and she did not deserve the focused blasting and hatred that people gave her for that film, because she was acting. We don't do this to anybody else, so why do we do this to someone just because they use their real name? And she said, all right, I'm not going to be around for this. I don't need it. And I think if the film would come out now, it would be a different story. But the internet being as young as it was in 1999 and 2000, we didn't know how to take that kind of stuff. We didn't have the thick skin that we do now, that we can just mute somebody or unfriend them or unfollow them. It was a little bit harder back then, and she made the only choice she thought she could make.
Well, I remember Heather got just lambasted in mainstream media. I mean, it wasn't just internet budding film criticism culture and message boards. She was being made fun of on television and shows. Saturday Night Live, famously, Sherry O'Terry parodied the big scene that Heather has where she is in front of the camera having her huge moment in Scary Movie. And Scary Movie was really the game changer for those kinds of comedies and satires and pastiche films that opened up the gates for the Not Another Teen Movie stuff and all the sequels to Scary Movie. But what happened was just this massive culture of poking fun, and basically so many people being like, oh, I wasn't scared of that. That was ridiculous. And her being the brunt of all that. And I really think, now that wouldn't happen because we don't have that kind of all water cooler community, Monday morning. Oh, did you see over the weekend all of the stuff making fun of Blair Witch? I think it was really unfair to her. And just like Jed's saying, she absolutely deserves her flowers.
Yep.
No, today she would just be dragged on Twitter, unfortunately.
Yeah, there's a whole
Either way
thing. Yeah. Ugh. I can only imagine all the hashtags and the dog whistle words and everything awful that would happen there.
Yeah, but she would be a meme. Well, I guess technically she is a meme now anyway, but yeah, I feel bad for her, and honestly, I would love to talk to her, just woman to woman, like, what was your experience? I mean, I was just telling Jed the other day, I'm really looking for a female mentor in my life, and holy shit, she would be like the best female mentor, I think. But yeah, well, I hope
there are ways to speak to her. You just have to pay, because she is a qualified therapist, offering her services for like $120 or something. So that's one way to get to her. I'm not saying you use that as an interview,
wow.
But you can do that.
Well, I would say, Blair, if you had a sit-down interview with her and went over some of these subjects and topics of discussion, I think that would make for a great watch.
I mean, if she would do it on camera, but I would just take a one-on-one, like, over a glass of wine with her too,
Nice.
Just because I think, yeah, I mean, it's an extremely unique experience that she had. Not that I have or ever will be on her level, but I was on a reality TV show and got married on the show, and I got dragged on Twitter. My mother got dragged on Twitter. My mother and I actually don't speak anymore because of the show. And it's slightly similar in the sense that, like, people don't know the whole story. They just knew the character, quote unquote, that I was portraying on the show. That was reality. And yeah, I mean, it is hard. I feel like I have a really thick skin, and I grew up with the internet. That's something also I think it's kind of interesting. All the actors were in their like early 20s, right, Matt?
Yeah, they were literally like 23, 24, and 25.
Yeah, so they didn't grow up with the internet like I did. So I think all of this happening at the scale that it was probably overwhelming and scary. And I mean, we have a word for it now, which is doxing, but like, I'm sure she got death threats at some point because people do that all the time, even now. And I'm sure it was terrifying back then. So I can't even imagine the stress that her and her co-stars were under, and even the directors. Did the directors have any, because you've spoken to Ed, Jed's spoken to Ed many times. I mean, did they have any negative experiences from making the movie?
Yeah, from the town of Burkittsville.
And just for the careers as well. You'd think the Blair Witch Project would boost your career to the highest echelons. Obviously not, though. It didn't quite work out. And what it did do is it spawned a million terrible found footage movies, which we're still experiencing now. And
you wouldn't know anything about that, Jed. No, I'm
kidding. But yeah, I think I mean, the thing that helps a lot is they get to sleep on beds made of money, which helps a lot, I think.
Yeah.
they get to fan themselves in the heat with wads of cash, which definitely could silence out any of the detractors.
Yeah.
So yeah, and I can't remember if I remember correctly, Matt. You would know. They retroactively fixed the contracts of the actors so they would get a piece of the pie too. Am I right in saying that?
Yeah, Artisan did not do a good job of taking care of the actors.
Yeah.
Famously sent them a fruit basket. Thank you for your participation in making us a lot of money. So Haxon said, "Look, you guys deserve something." So they helped him out, and I mean, yeah, Ed and Dan, their backlash, the town absolutely hated them, basically chased them
Yeah.
out of town.
Mhm.
And not their fault. They didn't think, it was an unintended consequence. It wasn't anything malicious, but the town was like, ain't gonna happen. Get out. So, and I think that, Ed and Dan are very, very, very talented filmmakers, salt of the earth people, love them dearly, and everybody involved, Mike Manello, Ben Rock, Greg Hale, and Rob Cowie. And I think the film itself didn't hurt them, but the inability for studios to pick these guys up to do something and let them do it, I think was the biggest downside to the Blair Witch coming out. Is, there's, well, you didn't really direct. Yeah, we directed this movie. And I wish that Artisan had gone back to them and said, okay, we want to do a sequel or we want to do a prequel. What do you guys want to do? Let us go do it. And Artisan thought that they were better than Filmmakers and decided to go their own route, which I think they got shot in the foot before they got out of the game.
Well, they
And
did have. I mean, they did want to do a sequel, but Artisan wanted another film out the next Halloween, and obviously they weren't ready for that.
Mhm.
So what happened happened. But like, you'd think by now someone would have just gone, guys, make another Blair Witch Project, same team, same writers, directors. Go make the film you want to, even if it's an unmitigated disaster. I think they deserve that. They deserve to make another Blair Witch film. It blows my mind that someone hasn't just said, okay, here's 5 million, 10 million, make another Blair Witch Project. Like,
yeah, and I think
Yeah,
they would.
but
I think
Yeah,
they
for
would
sure.
love to.
well, but you say that, Jed, coming from someone that had a lightning in a bottle moment himself, making a found footage film, 15 years down the road, if somebody offered you money, would you really make another host?
No.
There you go.
But Host didn't make me $500 million. If it did, I would be making Host 2 tomorrow. Trust me.
Not yet, Jed. Not yet.
But no, like I mean, speaking to Eduardo off the podcast, like we went into kind of detail about what he would do for a sequel and like what he wanted to do and what he would do now, and it's really interesting. Like I just wish they got the opportunity to do it. And Eduardo's still directing at really good stuff for TV. He did Yellow Jackets recently, which was brilliant. So
Yes.
he can still do it. He's still got the skills. He's honed his skills even better. Like I'd love to see what he do with the Blair Witch now. I want to see Heather's story explored a little bit more. I'm still under the belief. I fully subscribe to the theory that Heather is fully in on the whole Blair Witch thing. She knew what was going to happen. She lured sacrifices there in order so she could become filled with the spirit of the Blair Witch. And you can see that in her diary. It was intentional. Yeah, so I want to see that explored.
That's your version that you'll.
I've always been under the assumption that Blair Witch, we don't need another Blair Witch. It wasn't made to become a franchise and constantly going back and playing in that sandbox in the found footage realm. I think it's more of a detriment than an addition to that world, that mythology. And if Ed and Dan got back together, I'd like to see them do something completely different. Because I know that, those two could come up with something completely unlike we've seen before. And I'd like to see them do that.
But Matt, are you saying that in hindsight, because you've seen the two Blair Witch movies that have come out since the original, and they've been they've got a lot to be desired. Though there were parts of 2016 one that I kind of like, but if there had been sequels that were on the same level, then I think we'd be having a different conversation, because I think the world is so rich, the mythology is so rich. Like, there's stuff there to explore that won't harm the original. Like, if you go back like to the previous times when like the early days of Burkittsville, that's kind of why I'm interested in what happened then.
Yeah,
like
as
a
long
Prey
as they
kind
don't.
of thing with Blair Witch. Have it big,
Yeah.
way back.
Well,
Yeah.
and you can do that. Just people will say, "How would you do found footage from hundreds of years ago?" You do that by luckily the Blair Witch has time travel powers, and and Burkittsville, the wood is on a time loop, so you can have people with cameras going back to whatever decade they want to, whatever the witch sends them to with their cameras, and that's how you have found footage. And I mean, that's how the original footage was found in the first place, under the ground, that's been there for 100 years.
So now for the last half of the Digital Campfire today, we will be pitching our versions of the Blair Witch Project. I'll go first. No, I'm kidding. No, Matt, what were you going to say?
No, nothing. I was laughing at that because I'm trying to think about how they would walk into the town of Blair with camcorders and not be like burned at the stake automatically. I'm trying to run this
immediately
pitch through my
Salem
head.
type stuff.
Yeah,
See, I would
exactly.
do it in the future and have aliens, and the Blair Witch and aliens end up fighting. But nevertheless, we are towards the tail end of the campfire today. It is burning out. So let's do questions. The floor is open. Adam, did you have a question?
Hey, Adam. Welcome.
Is it working now?
There you go.
Yep.
Dope. Yeah, I don't know how to use any of this stuff. Hey guys, hello.
Hey, man.
Hey.
Yeah, so we were starting to talk a little bit about like the franchise and how it wasn't really meant to be a franchise and blah blah blah. I just like want to see more, like you guys were saying. So like, I mean, it's not really a question. It's just more like, yeah, franchise. Or like, I mean, the game was pretty reasonably successful, so you know.
I wasn't keen on
think,
the game. I wasn't keen on the game.
I think in reference to the game, I will die on this hill. That was never intended to be a Blair Witch game. They started making it and realized that this would make a good Blair Witch game because the only Blair Witch part of that game is at the beginning and the end, and they backed into it because it really doesn't add much to it, but it can if you look at it a certain way. But I think, we keep using the word franchise, and with Marvel and DC and all these big franchise films coming out, you could play in this sandbox with the Blair Witch if you don't think of it as a franchise. Don't approach it like this, like they do the Marvel movies or, the Hunger Games or the Matrix or anything like that. Approach it differently, and we can have an Ellie Kedward movie. We can have a Rustin Parr movie. We can have anything else that maybe we haven't talked about that was created by these guys, and it is a Blair Witch film. I just don't always think it needs to be found footage. I think we need to try something different, unlike what Book of Shadows did.
I agree with that a lot, actually. So.
You're not wrong. You're not wrong at all.
I disagree. I honestly disagree. I think the Blair Witch Project, it made up a lot of the rules of found footage. I think that's the template. I know there have been found footage films before that, but Blair Witch fully established the found footage rules. So I would love to see what a found footage Blair Witch film could do now. Now it's spawned a million rip-offs and a billion other terrible found footage films. I'd like to see, now that subgenre has been established using the rules from the first film, what it could do now, like if in the right hands. Because I think it would. I just think found footage films are the best because they're the only films that kind of scare me, because you think they're real, and yeah, that world is so fascinating to me. But I do agree with you that in the wrong hands, it will just further dilute the franchise. But I just think it'd be really, really cool. The only way I can see them doing it successfully is if they don't announce it's a Blair Witch movie. I know they tried to do that last time, but then they gave up like a week before the film came out. If nobody knew that this a film was the Blair Witch film until like I don't know what they would call it, but like some people go to a town and then you see that 15 minutes in you see they're in Burkittsville, then you'd be like, oh fuck, that would be
Yeah.
interesting. And if the trailers didn't give it away, if the trailers actually were misleading and made you think it was like a romantic comedy or something, of two people going on honeymoon somewhere back to where like one of them used to live, and then you just see them turn up at Burkittsville, you just think, oh shit, that would be cool. And that's the only thing where I can see it working, because there was no hype. Well, the only hype was out of Sundance for Blair Witch. People didn't really know how massive it would become, and there was a similar thing with Host, obviously. But I think once there's hype and there's an expectation, you're only going to be disappointed. So I think if they manage to backdoor it somehow, then you don't get all of that hype that will surround a Blair Witch movie, which pretty much killed the 2016 one before it came out because people had certain expectations. But
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned
Well, I
that. I
think
remember I was at San Diego Comic-Con when they did that, where it was
the
originally
woods,
the woods,
yeah.
yeah, and all of the banners and the promotional material was kind of teasing that it might be what we all kind of thought it was going to be. And then one of my guys on fandom.com team went into the screening and walked out of the newest Blair Witch and just lost his mind and absolutely loved that he had been basically duped that way. But again, with the information age and how we process new announcements and media frenzy and publicity, I don't know if there's any way that anyone could be surprised. It would be like trying to replicate what Hitchcock did with Psycho. Like, do not tell anybody what this is. But I'd love to see it if we could make it happen.
well, I think
It just would require the studio to really take that gamble. And it doesn't have to be a big film. You can make that film on $1 million and you spend another $1 million on advertising. That Warner Brothers just shelved a $90 million Batgirl film. So you're telling me there's not a studio out there that's not going to have $2 million, in the checkbook to write to someone to say, let's go do this and see what we can do, because they keep thinking bigger and bigger and bigger. And if it doesn't make $100 million, it's a failure. But hey, you make $50 million on $1 million investment. Why can't we have smaller films that do well with different types of advertising? Like you said, just all of a sudden this film has a teaser trailer and all they play is the teaser, and then it shows up in theaters. You just get people talking about it, and you don't talk to the director, you don't talk to the cast. You just put this movie out there, don't talk about it, and people have no clue what this movie is. People will want to go see it just for the curiosity.
That would be so much fun.
I would love it. I would go see it for that reason.
And I have to say, I won't be making a Blair Witch Project movie because Jed Shepherd's already taken that spot. But there are people out here working on trying to replicate the Blair Witch feel and marketing strategy, and I think we actually are closer than y'all think to having another type of Blair Witch movie, because I know if I'm thinking it, there's other filmmakers out in the world thinking it. So yeah, I think you just have to be really creative, and you have to use the platforms that exist now, because the internet's over a decade old, and you just have to be creative. So I think there are possibilities to have a true found footage film.
No one wants to take risks.
I can assure you of that.
I mean, when I say we, I mean the studios. I think any filmmaker, and I'm not one, but I could see filmmakers taking a risk to make something that nobody has seen before, but someone's got to see, okay, I get, someone in the studio that's writing the checks to get this thing out. They have to see that, and until those people get into power, and I hate even saying it like that, but then they get in those positions to make those decisions, someone's got to be willing to take a risk, because they'll greenlight a movie based on, oh, this director wants to do it. Okay, let's give him $50 million. But you can't give $1 million to someone who's got the passion, the drive, and has it all laid out. Say, let's do it.
100% agreement. And again, for found footage movies, you don't need that much to make a found footage film. Like, you don't. Like, we made Host for an absolute fraction of what people think that we made it for. And, well, I guess we made a bunch of shorts, but we were pretty much unknown. Someone took a chance on us, and because it's very low risk, and it ended up being massive. And again, like, what I'm trying to do is set up my own production company where I have a pot of money specifically for found footage films that is kind of hardwired into the formation of the company, where I am able to give people a whole bunch of money to make found footage films without too much worry, because of course it's a risk. Found footage films are a risk, and there's only 0.00001% of found footage films are any good, to be quite honest. Most of them, it's my favorite subgenre, by the way, so I'm not putting it down, but I will say most found footage films are absolutely terrible. Like, they are, because they think it's just about shaky cams and jump scares. It's not. It's about story. Story is the most important thing of all, like any film.
Well, that's where you have the advantage, Jed. You've got the secret formula.
Yeah, exactly. But even now, even after Host, like trying to pitch found footage films around Hollywood, people are still scared of it because they've been burnt so many times. Because straight after Blair Witch Project came out, people were very up for getting found footage films made, because they think, oh, we'll just make $500 million really easily. We'll just throw a random filmmaker $50,000 and he'll make us $500 million. And it never happened. It never happened again until Paranormal Activity. And it's very, very, very hard to do right. But if you find the right team and the right people, you can give them any amount of money and they will spin gold. Sorry, I don't know. I went on a tangent. I can't even remember what the original question was, but via the found footage.
Well, gentlemen, I know all of us could talk about found footage movies until the end of time, but I'm going to have to end this room fairly soon. But I want to make sure everybody gets their questions in before I do that. So Nick was here first, and then Alex, hi, Alex.
Alex
Noyer. Nick, did you have a question for our people?
Yeah, can you guys hear me?
Yes,
sir. Yeah, great.
All right, cool. Yeah, it was. I love the Blair Witch Project. It was. I wanted to go see it with my mom. She took me to see it whenever it came out. It was a wonderful movie. I was so scared after watching it. It was funny because living in Tennessee, we had. I didn't know it until a while back. We had the Bell Witch, which apparently in history, I think supernatural history in general, was the first time a ghost per se had killed somebody. And so you had that movie coming out, and it was a big deal because they were filming in Adams, Tennessee, which is north of Nashville. And you had American Haunting came out, and then you had an independent one coming out called Bell Witch. And it was weird to see these movies of urban legends in smaller towns and cities and stuff like that come up as well once the Blair Witch movie came out. And I was wondering if you guys were aware of that, or seen anything like that's happened as well after the movie.
So the question is, has anybody on stage seen a found footage film or a horror film that's based off of urban legends from small towns?
Yeah, correct.
Loads.
A lot. Yeah.
Yeah, I was gonna say the one that I can think of, just not being in the film industry, was The Last Broadcast, which gets a lot of comparisons to the Blair Witch because it was all based on quote unquote the Jersey Devil. But yeah, my God, there's so many found footage films. Which ones are based on a local legend that I can think of off the top of my head?
But Butterfly Kisses is really good because I think it's a made up legend, but that's a legend that there's a particular tunnel in this small town, and if you go out one end of it and you stare for an hour at the other end of the tunnel, a figure will appear, and then it will be scary. And then they figure out that if you put a camera at the end of the tunnel, that will act like an eye, and that can conjure this thing. It's really cool. You should watch Butterfly Kisses. The director died though, which is a real shame. Died young, but that has Eduardo Sanchez in it. Very, very cool.
But
Thank you.
I think, Nick, to kind of go back to what you're saying, urban legends just lend themselves so well to found footage, because it's this like ripple effect of, everybody, whispering, "Oh my God, did you hear what happened?" or whatever. So I'm actually glad you brought that up, because working on something kind of similar. But and just real quick, a plug, because this is my room and I can do that. If you want to see urban legend stuff, you can go to my TikTok or Instagram, and I make videos every single day about urban legends, haunted houses, dark tourist locations, and true crime sites all over the United States. And hopefully in October, we will be going international. So that's super exciting. But yeah, I love all that kind of stuff. And that's actually what this room is all about. And real quick, and then Alex, you can ask your question or make your comment, whatever. Next week at the Digital Campfire, we have a very special treat. I've also been talking about this documentary I shot back in March for a while, the Blair House, which is in Ohio. I was invited to film a weekend of a paranormal investigation with a team, a group of women, and shit went down. And this was a really insane experience, and one of the closest, I would say, to me having a personal paranormal experience. So all of that's on camera, and that will be coming out on my YouTube soon as well. But the woman that wrote the book about the Blair House and also owns it will be coming in to speak to us around the campfire next week. So that's super exciting. So that's what you can expect at the next Digital Campfire. Okay, Alex, what did you have to say?
Well, first of all, I wanted to pop in to hear. I'm sorry, I only caught the end of it. I'm actually, as we discussed, Blair, and I know I discussed with Jed as well, is that I'm in the midst of my delving into a found footage project as well, and which is very new for me, which has been a very interesting learning process. And it's funny because a lot of what I caught on this back end of the room was how good found footage project kind of have to just obviously center around a good solid concept, a solid idea, and then it's almost like you feel the project transcends the idea of just being a movie, and that's how it's communicated.
You dropped off, Alex.
Of trying to build up this sense of anticipation of what people could be experiencing, and I think Jed host was that it was a moment in time. It was really well captured. We know that when the Blair Witch Project came out, we all in a time when it was not about the internet and it was really about word of mouth, we rushed to the cinema to watch it, because I was in Paris at the time, and it was viral before viral was even an idea. And I think even if we look at Paranormal Activity, the marketing of it that they did, capitalizing early on social media, asking people via Facebook to demand that the film comes to their local theater. I think all that, again, that creates this sort of this cultural engagement, cultural movement around a found footage movie, and this is again going back to the strength of the idea, because you can rally troops like that around a solid idea, a feeling, a thrill, a moment. And you're right, Jed. Like many of them, kind of like fail at that because such is the challenge. And it's funny because it gets also often overlooked as a sort of the ugly duckling of the genre. But actually, it's an incredibly difficult subgenre to kind of do well. But it is also the one that just commandeers all the intricacies of what indie filmmaking demands, which is to be frugal and effective and innovative and pushing whatever you can in order to shoot what you want. and doing all this while trying to tell the audience that you're not the one shooting it. It's just, I mean, again, for me, who comes from more traditional sort of filmmaking stretches, I just like, even now, the idea to possibly develop that one, I'm actually giddy with excitement, because it feels like it just like, it feels like I'm a rookie again. It's fun. It's a lot of fun. So yeah, and the Blair Witch Project is completely the dawn of all this, because again, I still remember how it made me feel back then.
I like what you said, Alex. It's don't draw attention to the fact that we're watching found footage. Don't immerse us into the film that we're watching, the footage that we're watching. Don't call attention to the fact that this is found footage and we should be celebrating this film because it's found footage. And I think that's what the Blair Witch Project does. It puts us, we're the fourth camper. We're the fourth student filmmaker in the woods with them. It doesn't try to say, hey, look at me, look what I'm doing with this security footage, or look what I'm doing with this camcorder or this iPhone. I think any found footage film that is successful does not draw attention to the fact that it is found footage. That's just my opinion.
Yeah, and
really
no to the
point,
actors as well. And
Yeah.
you know, when you do the abstraction of the filmmaker, abstraction of the actors, the abstraction of the filmmaking craft altogether, in order to deliver the story into focus, it's all about the idea. It's all about the concept. It's all about the weight and power of that concept. And it's just, it's in a way, perhaps many filmmakers should make a found footage movie to just try to see how they feel in respect of their ego. Because it is very humbling to do one, because you're it's stripping everything bare, and it's I think it's perhaps why it's a genre that keeps coming back as well, because it also taps into whatever is going to be our medium at the time, like what you did, Jed, with Host. And it's just like, if you keep your eye, and Blair and I discuss all the time how she keeps her finger on the pulse and the zeitgeist, is just that the idea that, because this is where the next way to deliver your found footage is going to be, whatever is relevant. Like it was High 8 at the time of Blair Witch, or Zoom at the time of Host, and we don't know exactly what's going to be that sort of, there was the whole moment of a lot of GoPros, there was the DSLRs, there was, all the things that can be done. And so if you keep an eye on what people are using more and more, you're going to find what is going to be the format of the next found footage success story. I mean, obviously, it was a good, solid concept at the core.
Matt, there's something that you mentioned that I think really is a testament to how great Blair Witch is that as the viewer and almost a participant in the story, I felt, even personally, watching the film at 3 a.m, or when it first came out, the wondering, am I going to survive this? Am I going to make it through what is being present in the film, this whole ordeal that they're dealing with? Am I going to snap like Mike? Am I going to disappear like Josh? Am I going to wind up just completely overwhelmed and filled with fear? And that's timeless, and it's really tough to capture. And I think Host is a great example of, okay, how am I going to get through what's happening to everyone? And when a film really hits that spot, I think that's what makes it a success and makes it a long-lasting one that we'll talk about decades on.
Real quick, Adrian, what medium did you use for your found footage film?
He used a digital camera.
Yeah, a digital camera for my first found footage film, for Be My Cat, a film for Anne, and for my current one, which has been in the making for 7 years now. It's been crazy, but now I'm finally finishing it. It's for this one, an iPhone I use, but an iPhone is quite complicated for found footage, because I'm also acting, and if you touch the wrong part on the screen, you just lose everything you shot. So it's been it's been madness shooting with an iPhone, and I don't think I would do this ever again. Especially when you are also the star and the director and having to hold while you act and all that, because it can things can go wrong. And yeah. And
So
by the way,
you,
because we were talking a little bit about found footage. What I like the most about shooting found footage is because I can approach the movie like a documentary filmmaker. I work. I allow the actors to live in character for weeks or even months before shooting the movie, and then when there is this reality, this fictional reality already established, I literally introduce a camera there, and I just like a documentary filmmaker, and I just observe what's happening. I just observe that reality, the way it grows, and it catches a life of itself practically, and then I edit practically. I look at all the footage again like a documentary filmmaker does, and I just try to create the story practically at the end in post production, let's see what footage I got. So that's what's fascinating
That's
for me about
That's
found footage.
actually
so
just sorry, Blair, really quickly. That is something that people don't tell you about found footage films. You actually find the film in the edit. It's never because you take so much footage of when you're shooting it. You don't realize what you've got until you're in the edit process. That is where you actually find the film, which Host was found in the edit. For instance, we actually didn't even know what we had. So yeah, and I can't wait to see your new film, Adrian, because obviously I love Be My Cat.
yeah, so
Yeah,
that's what I was
same here.
gonna say.
exactly. Yeah.
Adrian, I didn't realize you directed Be My Cat.
Oh yeah.
So
That's
can
me.
you shout that out real quick, because that is such an underrated found footage film, and also, has Anne Hathaway seen it?
I haven't received any. We haven't received any sign from Anne whatsoever. I only know that her team is aware of the film, but I have no idea if Anne is aware herself or has seen. I would guess that after all these years, she at least heard of it or maybe watched the trailer, or who knows.
So, what year did that come out?
In 2015, yeah, it came out, but because we unfortunately we couldn't premiere it like in a top of the top festival like Sundance or something like that. Also, we couldn't get a top distributor and all that. It grew by word of little by little by little, like people recommending it to their friends, and some influencers talking about it. So it grew in time, and it's still growing. I mean, even to this day, it's a type of a film. More time passes, the more it's being discovered by more people. And it's yeah, that's the story of it.
Amazing. Well, it's one of my favorites. So if y'all haven't seen it, Be My Cat, which I don't know what platform it's on or where people can. It's on YouTube. Isn't it?
It's on. Yeah, thank you. It's so interesting to learn that you've heard of it as well. And yeah, it's on YouTube and on Tubi for free, and lots of other paid platforms. But yeah, that's YouTube and Tubi. Those are the easiest ones.
Well, we all know Blair Witch Project, and of course Host, and now DashCam, and all these now classic found footage films. But there's a ton that are lesser known, like yours and Butterfly Kisses, and a lot of others that, if you all haven't dived into the subgenre of found footage past Blair Witch and Host, etc., please do so, because it is one of the coolest genres, because it is this amazing culmination: documentary filmmaking, improvisation, filmmaking, indie filmmaking. It's just such a cool genre of horror films. So please look into the lesser known ones. So on that note, Matt, it was a pleasure. I'm so glad I finally got you into the Digital Campfire. You know everything there is to know. You're so well spoken. It's such a treat to listen to you talk about the history, the backstory, and the making of Blair Witch Project. And I just wanted to thank you again for showing Jed and I all that film history that you did. And everybody here, you'll be able to see it yourself on my YouTube next week through the documentary I'm releasing with all the footage that Jed and I shot together in Burkittsville, Maryland. And Matt did, I don't know, 10, 15 interviews with me throughout the entire process. So a lot of the stuff you'll be able to hear there as well. And also, like I mentioned at the top, I will be taking this recording and putting it on my YouTube channel, and I'm going to start doing that every week. And next week, Digital Campfire, same place, same time, with the Bel Air House and some special guests to talk about that. Any final statements, gentlemen, about the Blair Witch Project, our favorite found footage movie of all time?
I'd like to say something real quick. Jed, I didn't know that you were the one who did host. I love that movie.
Oh, cheers, man.
A friend hit me to it on Shudder. We watched it together. I nearly crapped my pants. Then we showed it to another group of our friends, and again I nearly crapped my pants. And I showed it to friends of mine, and I still also almost crapped my pants. It's a wonderful movie. Scared the crap out of me all 3 times I watched it. I'm trying to get more people to watch it. It's just so good. It's just wonderful. I really love it, and you did an amazing job with it.
Oh, thanks, man. I appreciate it. Yeah. I just before this was I was late. I had to speak in front of a Asian horror writing group, and had to speak about Host again. And they said, "Oh, you must be sick of talking about Host." I'm never sick of talking about Host. I love that movie. I watch it I've watched it maybe 3 times this year already, because I just love it. I think it's so fun just to watch my friends just run around and die in crazy ways.
Jed, do you want to tell everybody here that the Host girls, can you say that yet? What I'm about to say, do you know?
Oh, yes. So you'll see all the Host girls again in my segment of Scare Package 2, which will come out later on this year. I did a segment of that. That film, yeah. So it's going to be in some festivals. My segment is basically they just let me do what I want. So it's the Host girls like you've never seen them before.
Can't wait.
Yeah, it's going to be awesome.
And if y'all like urban legends, definitely check it out.
Yeah.
Okay, so and Andrew also has a film coming out, Mental Health and Horror. Alex Noyer, Sound of Violence, which has been out, but you can check that out. Adrian, Be My Cat. Everybody go pick up Matt's book. It's seriously, as a filmmaker, it's a must read. I've seriously read it back to front a million times, and it just sparked so many ideas for me. So it's definitely a great book to read. Anybody, but especially as a creative. And the Blair Witch Experience, you've got the link. Check that out,
I'm
y'all.
going.
And go support Burkittsville, Maryland, and our new mayor, Michael Robinson.
Woo!
And again,
Yes.
I will see you next week at the Digital Campfire. I appreciate you all being here, sitting by the fire with me. And yeah, sweet screams. Check you next time.
Thanks, Blair.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks, Blair.
Thanks, guys.
Thank
Take care,
you.
everyone.
Take care, Blair.
Thanks. Bye. Take care.